making his capital in the city of Nicomedia in Asia Minor, essentially for the same strategic reasons Constantine chose to build his capital in Byzantium. Diocletian settled a brief war with the Sarmatians before taking a tour of the eastern provinces to ensure that the new administration would not have to deal with any problems from seditious-minded locals. It had, after all, been only a decade since the eastern Mediterranean had nearly become its own political entity. For all of 286, Diocletian put his stamp on the east, and back in Nicomedia in 287, he received the good news that far from looking for revenge, the Sassanid king Bahram II was looking for peace. The Persian king sent an embassy to Diocletian with gifts and promises of a stable border between the two great empires. Delighted that he might be able to solve the Persian question diplomatically, Diocletian jumped at the overtures, and after some haggling, the two sides agreed to swap some territory in order to rationalize the border, and then pledge mutual friendship and eternal peace. It didn't turn out to be exactly eternal peace, but at that moment, with so much else to deal with, the promise of even a temporary peace on the Eastern Front was music to Diocletian's ears. Unfortunately, the reason there was so much else to deal with was because despite getting off to a good start, Maximian had run into some serious difficulties in the West. As I just mentioned, Diocletian was not omnipotent, and he was forced to improvise his plans on the fly. The first test of his ability to make it up as he went along came early in 286, when frantic reports came pouring in that a general named Carausius had broken free of Maximian's control and had proclaimed himself Augustus of Britain and Northern Gaul. Well, hell. To go back a bit, after being named Caesar, Maximian had traveled north to Gaul, where he set up a capital in Mainz. His first major test came against a collection of peasants and ex-soldiers called, and I know I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, the Bagauti. We have very little understanding of the group, and no one really knows whether they were a real revolutionary force or whether they were just opportunistic brigands. But they had been running rampant throughout central Gaul for years and had to be stopped. Maximian, with the authority and resources of an emperor, was able to easily divide and conquer the gangs. But with Roman attention focused on the interior, tribes of Alemanni and Burgundians took advantage of the situation and began raiding into the empire. Compounding this threat along the Upper Rhine was the new threat of Frankish and Saxon pirates who were based around the Lower Rhine. As Maximian dealt with the Alemanni and the Burgundians, he delegated the piracy issue to a highly capable general named Carausius, who was not only a native of northern Gaul, but also an experienced naval captain. At first, everything went great. Maximian pushed back the Germans in the south, while Carausius ran circles around the overmatched pirates in the north. But then troubling reports began to filter down to Maximian. Rather than returning the captured loot to its rightful owners, or at the very least collecting it in some public treasury, he was siphoning it off into his own private stashes. And worse than that, it was being reported that Carausius was waiting for the pirates to finish plundering before he made any move to intercept them, so as to maximize his own profit. Now, a little pocket lining is one thing, but this breach of faith, actually standing by and allowing pirates to plunder and burn, was something else entirely. Maximian may have been a rough soldier, but a sense of honor pervaded his commitment to the empire. The legions were there to defend, not to exploit. Carausius, whatever his merits, had gone too far. And this is where, rather than laying some careful trap for his wayward admiral, rather than coaxing him out of his stronghold with flattery and promises of friendship, Maximian simply demanded Carausius report at once to account for himself. Understandably nervous about what might happen if he complied, Carausius hesitated, which caused Maximian to declare him a public enemy and order his execution. This, of course, immediately negated any possibility of a peaceful end to the situation. Carausius had at his disposal the entire Roman fleet, as well as the massive pile of loot he had spent the last few months accumulating. If Maximian wanted him, he could try to come get him, but good luck with that. Carausius withdrew to Britain, where, with the help of his ill-gotten gains, he secured the loyalty of the legions stationed there. At the same time, everyone suddenly became aware of the back-channel talks Carausius had been engaged in with the Franks this whole time. When the split with Maximian became official, the Franks seized most of the Gallic coast, and in particular, the port of Boulogne. With the help of his new German allies, Carausius now controlled an impregnable little kingdom. Even if Maximian were able to drive off the Franks, the Caesar had no fleet and no way of even reaching Britain, let alone fighting for it. And even then, getting bogged down in the north threatened the peace everywhere else. Reluctantly, Maximian allowed Carausius to hold his little kingdom. This sudden rebellion forced Diocletian's hand. Up to this point, the relationship between Diocletian and Maximian had been one of Augustus and Caesar, father and son. But with Carausius declaring himself Augustus, Diocletian had to match the bet on the table. It wouldn't do from a public relations standpoint to have an Augustus, self-proclaimed or otherwise, being met by a mere Caesar. The optics of it were all wrong. So in April 286, he further elevated Maximian to the rank of Augustus, and henceforth their relationship was one of brothers, rather than that of father and son. Though he had botched the handling of Carausius, Diocletian still had faith in Maximian, and Maximian, for now, continued to prove his worth. He may have been politically inept, but as a soldier he was second to none. Refusing to launch a rash campaign to retake Britain, Maximian kept his focus on southern and central Gaul, campaigning on both sides of the river to completely pacify the region before allowing himself to turn to the north. Not that preparations weren't underway. A fleet was even then being constructed for the eventual invasion of Britain, but Maximian wanted to make damn sure that his back was covered before he went north. Plus, Carausius' rebellion had led him naturally into alliance with the German tribes. By launching a scorched earth campaign in Germany, Maximian hoped to devastate all of Carausius' allies, leaving the treasonous general isolated on his island without mainland support. All through 286 and 287, while Diocletian was settling things diplomatically in the east, Maximian was settling things with the sword in the west. In the spring of 288, however, Diocletian felt confident enough in the stability of the eastern provinces that he decided to come to Gaul himself and aid his brother emperor. The breakaway of Carausius was without a doubt the single most important thing going on in the empire at that moment. The prestige of the new administration was on the line, and Diocletian wanted to make sure that nothing was left to chance. The senior Augustus had his sights set on completely redefining the imperial order, with the express aim of denying future ambitious generals access to the kind of legitimacy they would need to usurp the throne, and, as you can imagine, the existence of a usurper in Britain was seriously upsetting Diocletian's plans. And to explain what I mean by denying access to legitimacy, we have to go back in time a bit. When he was reorganizing the state, Augustus used the Senate's long-standing and unrivaled authority to convey legitimacy onto his new regime. After 2.5 centuries, though, the Augustan system had finally cracked, and legitimacy was now conferred not by the Senate, but by the troops in the field. You could say that this had always been the case, but it was never so nakedly apparent to the soldiers themselves as it was during the crisis years. They used their new power with reckless abandon, and emperors were made and unmade at the drop of a hat. Diocletian had thought about how to wrest this power away from the soldiers, and he thought that he had hit upon a solution. Rather than looking down to the legions or over to the Senate for their legitimacy, emperors should henceforth look up to the heavens. This was a hugely important step in the history of political theory in the West, as it was here in the late 280s AD that Diocletian laid the foundation for 1,500 years of divinely appointed kings ruling over Europe. The fascinating thing about all this is that this foundation was laid because of the specific circumstances facing Diocletian. He needed to restore discipline to the troops and restore a sense of awe-inspiring majesty to the office of emperor in order to restore stability to the empire. In his biography of Diocletian, Stephen Williams makes the point that though their policies were miles apart, that at heart, Augustus and Diocletian were really the same kind of man. Both were acutely aware that they needed to find a way to restore order after years of chaos. Had their roles been reversed, it would not at all have been out of character for Diocletian to have used the institutions of the Republic to stabilize a new autocracy, nor would it have been out of character for Augustus to argue for divine right following the crisis of the 3rd century. Neither man was an ideologue. They were pragmatists, more than willing to follow whichever course they thought would best achieve their ends. So, it was not megalomania that he was appointed by Jupiter, and nothing less than Jupiter's agent on Earth, just as it was not humility that led Augustus to tell everyone that he was merely the first citizen. It was rather, in both cases, a carefully thought-out piece of pageantry that each believed would halt the entropy that had afflicted their empire. It was in this way that the formal slide, and here is another one of those arbitrary labels we use to keep history straight in our heads, from Principate to Dominant, from the emperor styled as first citizen to the emperor styled as your lord and master. It was as he was finishing up his negotiations with the Persians in 287 that Diocletian first began to claim the divine authority that would become the foundation of his regime and the foundation of all future regimes. He took for himself the title Jovius, and gave to Maximian the title Herculeus, references to the respective patron deities Diocletian had chosen for them, Jupiter and Hercules. The former, the head of the gods, the master architect, the supreme authority. The latter, the great hero, the indefatigable defender of mankind. And, this is where the supreme political artistry of Diocletian becomes apparent, the ever-ready tool of Jupiter. As Diocletian was setting up his new imperial paradigm, he made sure that it cemented the relationship he wished to have with his brother Emperor Maximian. Diocletian would be Jupiter, the architect of policy. Maximian would be Hercules, the hands that carried out those policies. It was a relationship that suited both men just fine. Maximian was no politician, and Diocletian was no general. Down the road, though, these new divinely inspired dynasties would run into problems. What if the new Jovius lacked vision? What if the new Hercules didn't want to take orders? But these were questions for another day. For now, Jupiter and Hercules would rule the united empire in harmony. Well, dang it, not fully united anymore. Hercules had gone and blundered away the island of Britain. Next week, Jupiter will travel to the west to help his faithful hero regain his footing. But it won't do much good. After running a joint campaign to put the final crackdown on any German troublemakers, Diocletian would leave the recovery of Britain in the hands of Maximian,